Welcome to the Power Curve. I'm Holly Scott. In our podcast, I have the opportunity to chat with accomplished industry executives regarding decisions they've made along their career path with the idea of empowering you, our audience, as you navigate your own career trajectory. Today, I have the pleasure of having with me the CEO of Clarity, Carrie Ivers Reeuwijk. She is here to chat with us about her very interesting path. And to start, Carrie, if you wouldn't mind, would you give us a little overview of Clarity and the interesting position that you are in the market, what we're looking to do there?
Sure. So Clarity is a really exciting new company. We really kicked off in February of this year and are growing very, very quickly. The company was founded by Dr. Connie Lehman, who is the head of breast imaging at Mass General Brigham, and she is also a professor at Harvard. And she's been doing research in the domain of, it's kind of a subdomain of radiomics, specifically focused on breast imaging. And what we're doing is using mammograms to predict an individual's likelihood of developing cancer by applying AI and deep learning neural networks to those mammograms. So it's a really fantastic kind of space to be in. It's right on the cutting edge of how healthcare is evolving. And we're excited to really help identify some women who may be falling through the cracks, who might be eligible for additional screening to catch cancer early, if that makes sense.
Absolutely. Yeah, the power to change the paradigm of mammography is it could have such an incredible reach globally, so that in itself is exciting. And also you're in a time, from a timing perspective, you're at a point in the marketplace where technology and healthcare is ripe for disruption, right? And coming together, we're seeing more interest and more engagement and partnership across all the different modalities between the clinician, the payer, the providers. And as I pull this back to you and your career, this is fascinating to me, hence the reason I really was excited to chat with you, because this intersection of technology and healthcare is highly buzzed about, highly anticipated. And I'm curious on how we got here, right? Because it looks like for the last 10 years or so, you've been involved with this intersection of technology and healthcare.
Yeah. And I think it's actually even been longer, but we won't count the years. But healthcare and technology have intersected in so many different ways. I mean, there's obviously, you've got medical devices and you've got analytics, and you've got actual electronic medical records and so forth. So I think healthcare has moved slower than a lot of other organizations, and we could spend an hour talking about why that's the case. But I think, with the adoption of electronic medical records through kind of the Affordable Care Act, and that started the acceleration. But I really think COVID has kind of put a foot on the gas pedal, if you will, and kind of forced a lot of disruption, some not great, but a lot actually extremely positive for the healthcare industry. I mean, telemedicine, nobody was using telemedicine 2 years ago, and now it's kind of quite common. In fact, a lot of people consider their primary care doc to be a teledoc physician or an Amwell physician. So that is causing all kinds of disruption all over the place in healthcare, and it's changing the roles of payers, providers, tech companies in really interesting ways. And, I feel like we've always been collaborative as a whole, but I think there are new opportunities now. And it's a really exciting time to be in healthcare for sure.
Yes, and with an intelligence-based company, as you are, with a again a big multi-billion-dollar reach when it comes to how many mammograms are performed annually. This is an enormous play, and more intelligence about predisposition to treat and intervene in these diseases is become one that not only is the right thing to do, right, as we're all in healthcare for the patient, but it's also, from a value-based healthcare model, finally getting traction in terms of adoption. And let's look at this data and see how we can minimize the intervention needed for these patients over a lifetime and watch
Absolutely.
costs. And so, no, this is super exciting. And if I look back where in how you got here, as we start, we have to kind of trail back to the beginning. I have to ask you about
Yeah,
your upbringing, your life, because it's really
sure.
interesting when I chat with CEOs to see some of the similarities and some of the differences. So, as you think of yourself as a leader now and
Mhm.
as an accomplished leader, were there lessons that you think of when you think of your childhood, when you think of your early life, that helped best position you for success?
A- Absolutely. I mean, so I come from a whole family of entrepreneurs, literally everyone. And they're all self-made. My dad grew up on a farm in very rural Ohio and went on to run several technology companies. My mom actually grew up, she was one of 5 kids and their mom was a teacher. It was a single parent household. And she went on to end up starting one of the most successful divisions of Dress for Success, which is a company that helps empower women who have gone through very difficult periods and helping them, learn how to interview and get jobs. And she made a huge impact on the local community. But I have 2 brothers and a sister. My sister started an AI company well before I did. And she and her husband are running that very successfully. And then both of my brothers have computer science backgrounds, and one of them is also running and co-founded a very successful startup in a really interesting sector. He's actually working with, kind of the convenience stores that are part of gas stations that are these family-owned businesses. So that's really interesting. And then my other brother, who's a pilot, and he plays the guitar, and he runs 3 small tech companies. So I think it might be kind of embedded in our blood. But I certainly, was surrounded by a family of people who, even when we didn't have very much money, still felt like we could lean in and take risk. And so I guess the risk threshold is pretty high. So that certainly helps when you're looking at doing something like we're doing with Clarity.
Oh my gosh. And it's funny that you share that example, and that was unprompted. That was the first example. And I will tell you that propensity to tolerate risk and learn, and that confidence to fail but learn, along the way, that is the number one trait that I hear from successful CEOs, especially in the young companies, that they really have attributed to their life, that their parenting followed along the lines of they were empowered to try and try again. They were encouraged to take the right road, not necessarily the safe road. So that's pretty interesting. You had a big household. It wasn't in what they fed you. It was definitely what they showed you.
Absolutely. And it wasn't always easy. But it was always interesting. I mean, never a dull moment, my mom would say all the time.
Oh my goodness.
So
how did you keep competitiveness healthy? So you had a big family, and I saw you went on. So what I thought was interesting about you earlier, you're an athlete, you were, obviously a student. So you have that in you, right? And now I'm hearing you have those high thinking, high producing siblings. How did your parents balance healthy competitiveness in your household?
Yeah, it's a good question. I mean, I think from my perspective, it never really felt like I was competing with my sibling. I mean, I'm yes, here and there, but we're all so different and different in terms of what we like and what we've gravitated to. I've always been gravitating toward healthcare. My sister's an attorney, and then both of my brothers, one was more in kind of sales and kind of the commercial side of technology companies, and the other one was more of a CTO as he kind of grew his career. So although we were, there were 4 of us in one household, my parents were running businesses, so we had to learn to be independent and stick together. And my siblings are my best friends. So And I really have learned a lot from each of them along my career path as well. And they're some of the first people I call when I get stuck or have a question, because they have domain expertise that I don't have. So in general, I feel like we've been lucky to have a pretty collaborative group, if you will.
Well, that's, yeah, it sounds like it was set up that way, right? So,
Yeah.
so your parents, they instilled in you the independence, the competitiveness with yourself to excel and push yourself, yet support each other and help lift each other up.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And it was fun. I mean, we really, when we were growing up, we were all naturally good at swimming. So when we grew up, the swim teams would love it when we showed up, because there were 4 swimmers added to the swim team. And, it was all about helping the team win. And we just enjoyed, being part of that. So I never really, there wasn't much friction between us, if that makes sense. So it was more, I remember it being a lot of fun.
It sounds like it. And especially since they're still the ones that you pick up and call.
Oh, yeah.
That becomes an amazing support system for you, in terms of just
fantastic.
Yeah. And for those who don't necessarily have that in a family, you can create that in a community too. You have 100%. to focus on it and deliberately create it. You have to.
I could not agree more.
Yeah.
Yes.
And I've seen that happen too. People who have less optimal families, they create that community that keeps them at that optimal level, and with other people they admire and want to emulate. So my mom, my grandmother was right when they said, you become a product of who you hang around with, and pushing yourself to hang around with people that you aspire to and that challenge you and so forth. So that's great. So fast forward here, how did you land your first role out of college?
So I was planning to go to med school like so many people. I took all the classes, I took the MCAT, and I just got to the end of my senior year. And I was like, I'm not sure I'm ready to dive in and make that commitment yet. So I ended up going back to Cincinnati, which is where I grew up. And I was trying to figure out what I wanted to do. And I over the summer, I just decided to apply to teach high school chemistry and bio at this huge all boys high school in Cincinnati, where my brothers had happened to go to high school, and I got the job. So my first 2 years out of college, I was teaching kids that were, some of them were seniors. So they were like 3 years younger than I was. It was very intense. It was by far the hardest job I've ever had. Also the most rewarding. And I learned how to overcome my fear of public speaking. I learned how to really kind of commit to being 100%, because I felt this huge responsibility of, realizing that most of the kids I was teaching chemistry to were never going to take chemistry again in their life. So I was it. So I just, I took it very seriously, and the faculty were fantastic. It was really a pivotal moment for me. Even though I'm not teaching now, it's something that has, it's a skill that has certainly had a footprint on every other role that I've had in my career, for sure.
Wow, that's not common to have that step in education.
Yeah.
Which I could see being a powerful trait as you move into other areas of the business.
Absolutely.
So what got you into industry? Was there a business role that tapped you on the shoulder, or what was that transition like?
Yeah. So, I kind of was, had decided that I was preparing that after my second year, preparing these kids for the real world. And I didn't even know what the real world was myself, because I had just gone straight into teaching. And so, I ended up taking a position with, it was an interesting company based in Washington, D.C. It was right across from the White House. And it was a big law firm that was doing work with pharmaceutical companies, but they had created this business arm that was doing cutting edge research on new sectors and working with startups kind of free of charge to help them look and analyze the market and understand, how things are evolving. And way back then, I mean, this is in the, late 90s. I had done a big research project on genomics, proteomics, and radiomics, which is the division that we're in now. So, Yeah. So I just, you mentioned love of learning. That's me. I mean, I just love learning new things. So that role was incredible. I learned a ton, and worked really, really hard, and really enjoyed it. So that was kind of my transition back into industry, and then kind of went from there. Yeah.
Was it by happenstance, or did you have a mentor at that
Yeah.
time, or?
Yes, a friend from college who had graduated earlier than I was working there, and I had always admired her.
Mm-hmm.
And I knew she was thinking about going to medical school, so I wanted to kind of reconnect. She ended up going to medical school, but yeah, she was the one who was like, "You should come to DC and work with us." So yeah, so I was like, "Okay, I'll move to DC."
Again, fearless. Fearless.
Yeah.
Comes back to that fear. That's where it starts. That's where it starts.
Yeah.
That's amazing. So the other thing that I think makes you really unique is there's this natural and innate leadership that you have. You do. You have it. It radiates from you, and I do see this. I'm not the only one who sees it. You've been on podium over 700 plus times. Okay, so. I'm kind, but not that kind. I call it like I see it. That is, to me, if I were to say you're really good at a few different things, I would put that as number one. I see that in you as a leader of people and also of businesses, and I would put them at level position. Both are equally strong. Mm-hmm. When did you realize that about yourself? When did you see that? Because you have to get to a point, you're growing up, whether it's, early, you're constantly put in lead positions in school and clubs and teams, and, you're starting to make decisions for other people, and they're looking to you for guidance. Were there points along the way where you started to see the writing on the wall and gain the confidence that leadership was in your track?
It's interesting. I've never really thought about it like that. I think the thread that kind of runs through positions and things that I've done is, everything I've done, I've always carried, and I can't, to a fault sometimes, an authentic passion for it. So whatever it is, I get excited about it or curious, and then dive in and want to learn. And then I think that authenticity and the depth and breadth of work I do around it then naturally lends itself to people who are trying to figure it out, wanting to gravitate toward that, if that makes sense. So even with delivering, presentation, I had this great mentor at the advisory board who told me, I was nervous going in to give a big presentation to all these healthcare leaders, and I was young, and he sat me down and he said, "Look, Carrie, you don't need to know everything that they know. Don't set that as the expectation. All you have to know is more about this topic, and then you'll add value." And I think that theme really runs through leadership and life. It's, when you're running a business, it's all about the people, and it's all about, the focus and driving alignment, and just kind of keeping all these incredibly talented people who have skill sets that you don't have connected to, a unifying vision. That's really what I see my job as right now, is finding these experts and then helping them collaborate. And I think that's the underlying element of it is, you've got to get in and roll up your sleeves and get deep, and be authentic. And then the other elements end up naturally kind of coming together, if that makes sense. It builds trust. It builds, so every leader I've ever looked up to, they had knowledge and passion and focus, and you just gradually wanted to follow them. And I feel like that's a big core element, at least of my style of leadership. And it's been that way even since I was, in high school, leading the swim team. I'm sure I got elected captain, not because I was the fastest swimmer, but because I was the biggest team cheerleader, and the most passionate about, making sure everybody was performing well as a group. So I've never really thought about it as like definitive, I'm a leader or something. And it just kind of happened.
It happened. It happened. And then all of a sudden you turn around and you're a leader.
Yeah, exactly.
That's how the best leaders are
I
grown.
still can't believe it. Yeah.
As I look on the outside, and now you'll have an opportunity to sit back and reflect on it. If you read the tea leaves, it started a lot earlier than your career titles allude to. You know, those traits and that ability to engage and influence across parties, whether it's swim or a big business. You know, you've ranged from software data scientists to biotech scientists to Wall Street. You know, so all of these pieces of that common theme, that's a very helpful trait for individuals to work towards as they look at growth in that area. And that you hit on a huge point. You may not have been the fastest swimmer, whether you were or you weren't. Sometimes individuals believe that they have to be the best at their craft to lead their craft. And that's not necessarily the case. You have to be good at it and you have to be credible, certainly. But in terms of stepping back and being able to allow others to excel and allow it, have your ego, you know, put to the side and allow others to excel, and also even broader to facilitate their growth. That's where the real magic happens. That's where I can really see staying power. And I assume that's been something that you've been called to do over and over again in your last few C roles.
For sure. I mean, I think there's value in companies in both individual contributors and leaders. And I've been both in my career. I think it's really, really hard to be both simultaneously. I just think if you're going to go down the path of being the absolute best at whatever it is, it's just really hard then to have a team underneath you and be focused on the collaborative effort and the dynamics. And because they're both tend to be very different skills that you're drawing upon. So I don't think you have to be one or the other. You can be both in your career at different moments in time, but it's kind of like, you know, they did all those studies to show that multitasking is a lie. I 100% agree with that. I think if you're typing a text while you're on a Zoom, you're not listening to the person on the Zoom. And so you're missing pieces. And so I think some people try to like have one foot in each boat. My recommendation is always, you know, to people I mentor is pick the one that you need to do for that moment in your career, you know, either be the best at the functional area or be the best leader. I think it's hard to be in, you know, both. But different people have different schools of thought.
No, it's true. Yeah. If you can't hyper focus, it makes it very difficult to handle the curveballs, right?
Yeah.
And the curveballs come likely when you're not fully anticipating them and not locked and loaded in order to catch it. So look, everyone's had them. If you think about your careers, has there been a moment where you were really thrown a tough curveball and you had to, you know, you were off balanced and you had to regroup? I'd love to hear about it and how you managed through it.
Yeah. Oh gosh, there's so many. I was actually thinking about that and I was like, wow, it's going to be hard to pick. I've had so many, you know, when you put yourself out there. I mean, I've had so many pivotal moments, like everybody, where you've lost a deal because you said the wrong things in a meeting, or you know, I remember giving a really big presentation and I was exhausted from traveling in the night before I had you know, and it just didn't go well. And it was devastating, you know, and it makes you sit back and take notice and question, of course. But I think all of those failures have taught me so many important things beyond, you know, the most important, which is humility, of course. But I think, you know, learning how to be a better listener in meetings, especially learning how to make sure that you're prepared, but not scripted. And then I think learning how to forgive yourself and actually take something, you know, throw away the pieces that are going to bring you down and aren't going to be helpful, but really own the pieces that can help you get better. I mean, those failures are some of the most important parts of making me better in every single job I've ever had. I think the failures were the critical components. And, it's interesting because I was thinking about this before our conversation, like, we talk a lot about risk when you're doing these startups, but it's interesting because I always look at it the other way. So with Clarity, kind of going from a safe big company perspective and hopping into something that's small and volatile and arguably risky to others outside, it might seem like, wow, that takes a lot of courage. To me, it was the opposite. Like I would have regretted it so much if I'd stayed in my, well-paying, cushy job and not done this. I think some people have this, I see it often, and it's usually very talented people, but they get into a role, they get really good at it. They've got colleagues they like, they're in a happy place, but they're doing the same thing for a long time. And there's fear of switching. And I call it career inertia, and it's easy to kind of fall into. Luckily, I have this kind of squirrely feeling in my gut sometimes. And once I feel comfortable, I'm like, okay, it's time to take that next step. And so I've always, leaned into that and trusted it. And I think that's what's helped me in my career kind of get those other elements or skills or perspectives that become so important as you move forward. But I think that there's a lot of risk in staying where you are for too long. And I see a lot of people that I think are extremely talented at staying in, that job inertia for a little bit too long. Yeah. Time is, as you get older, you realize like you don't have that much time to accomplish your career. Like there's so much to be done, and time works against you. And now that I'm old, I'm like really feeling that. But I always tell people who ask me, lean in as soon as you feel like you're stuck. That's a big red flag, and it's time to kind of either find something else inside your company or start looking for that next role to take on.
You reminded me of something that Joe and I over the years have talked about that kind of sums it up. There's a Pink Floyd song. There's a quote that says, "Did you exchange a walk-on part in the war for a lead role in a cage?" Yeah. And if you think about those words, it really is very, very difficult when you are in that cage, and that cage may be, and you may be in that lead role in the cage, right? You're in a very well-paid position. You've got a big house, you've got a big family, you've got kids, you've got a spouse that's relying on what you bring to the table every week. And then there's this itch that you want to go out and you want to make something big happen. And that, that walk-on part in the war, it's a hard conversation to have with not only yourself, but all the stakeholders in the business that you have built, which becomes our livelihood.
That's right. 100%. And it's, I think maybe it's just coming from a scrappy family that, where we were taking risk when we didn't have the financial security and so forth. I've always tried to kind of live my life so that I can to have the freedom to do things and just be a little bit more conservative. But everybody has different competing elements and different factors in their life. And it's clear that some people just they're not in a position to do that. I 100% respect it. I'm more talking about those moments where, you're looking over on the side and you see something interesting, but the fear is what's holding you back, not your life circumstances. And it's hard for a lot of people who have been in a place for a very long time to make that transition. But every time I've done it, I've never looked back. I mean, they haven't always been like the greatest jobs ever. Not everything is perfect, but it was worth it no matter what. It was worth the experience for sure.
Well, it sounds like you protected that side of you early on. Going your first job being a teacher, You
Mm-hmm.
certainly weren't financially motivated
Oh,
exclusively
no.
that time, right? So you went and you did this, and some of your best career lessons were learned during that period of
Absolutely.
time. So if you're crafting your career knowing that you want some sort of ability to make more bold decisions,
Mm-hmm.
look, it does come back to fear. All those
Yeah.
pieces, it is fear based. You know, someone who's leaving because of the financial strap and all of that comes back to what happens if.
Right.
It's one and the same. So padding in more of that what if, planning for maybe keeping your livelihood at a more conservative level so that you have the
Mm-hmm.
options. So you're
Yep.
not held hostage
Mm-hmm.
by what is going to be rewarded to you. I talk to people every single day that are in situations where they have compensation that
Mm-hmm.
makes it very challenging to go to a
Yep.
startup. When a
Yep.
company is making, when a company's revenue producing, the cash is there. It's just a different
Yeah.
situation. So this is something that has to be looked at holistically. And the earlier you start looking at it, the more you can prepare for these potential decisions. So
Yeah.
that's really insightful and very valuable because
Yeah.
I could see that benefiting individuals who are finding themselves drawn to it.
Well, and what's nice about the world now post-COVID is that you can live anywhere. So you can work for a
Yes.
company in New York City, but live
Yes.
in a rural location somewhere else if you choose to, that has a lower cost of living and still be compensated at the same level as the people in New York. So I think that's going to create a super interesting shift. And, we'll see how it ends up panning out. But I can tell you here in Austin, where we live, everyone's moving here from California and it's crazy. I mean, it's, they're like, wait, I can get a house for the cost of my apartment with 2 bedrooms. And,
Yes.
and then they're still working for the companies in California. So it's going to be interesting to see how all of that evolves for sure.
Yes. We're actually really optimistic about that being a good thing for many people, including those in
Mhm.
California, because
Right.
the cost of living, the commute, there's so many factors there that are
Oh, yeah.
challenging. So,
Mm.
no, you're right, and I appreciate that. Tell me about the women in technology affiliation that you
Mhm.
had. It sounds like that's been a big part
Yeah.
and
So
natural for you.
I was working at the advisory board, and we had moved to Austin, and they had bought a couple of analytics companies, which ended up being very successful. And the group down here in Austin was largely the technical group, so product management, all the engineers, which makes sense because Austin's such a fantastic technology hub, and there's so many talented people here that can code. And I feel like it's continuing to explode with Tesla coming and all these other companies. But when I walked into the office, one thing that struck me was that in the DC office, which I had come from, it was predominantly female employees. It was more than 50% women working there. In the Austin office, it was like 10%. And I think I'm probably being generous. And again, part of that is we can go into all the whys, but a lot of it was just, there just aren't that many women in these high-powered technical jobs. And so we really felt like we wanted to try and pull together those that were in the office and make sure they felt like they had a voice and a comfort zone and could talk to other women who are in the similar situation. And so we just kind of started this Women in Technology group. And we had some very interesting conversations, even just about meeting dynamics and leaning in and making your voice heard. And it's things that, for me growing up with brothers seemed like, of course you're going to do that, but not everybody has that. And so, yeah, it was a very interesting time to start having those discussions. And we've come so far since then, but we still have a long way to go. And I'm thinking a lot, how do I help through this company? Is there a way to help even kind of encourage more women to go into the technical aspects, lean into AI? We need more diversity. We need more, and it's not that there aren't a lot of talented people there. That's not what I'm saying at all. But I think, for the industry, we need those other voices kind of in this sector. So we're actually proactively working with a group here in Austin that helps startups think about diversity and inclusion. It's important. I think it's really important for our work as well. So
You hit it on the head. It's the work benefits when we have the diversity of thought and that
Yeah.
and that inclusion and that elevation across the
Yeah.
board. And you hit on something earlier that I think is also really relevant. You spoke to humility as a leader. Humility as a leader is interesting because historically speaking, if we go back decades and over time, the stodgy, primarily male entities, if they showed humility, it was typically seen as a weakness.
Yeah.
And for some time, and I can recall, because again, I don't like it old, we're experienced. I can remember, women being encouraged to not show that side of theirs because that's a vulnerable side. And, walking into the room in a skirt instead of pants, you're already got, you got to step up to it. So now, look, I'm not dwelling on history. We've come a long way. And now with servant leadership being such more of an empowering tool that many good leaders are moving towards, it's interesting that you mentioned humility. And I am curious if you have had those moments with yourself as a leader of a company. I mean, you've got all these eyes, all these people looking at you. There's a balance between, I want to be honest and I want to be authentic and I want to make sure that they understand that I'm human, and them not seeing you as either strong or being afraid to give too much of their card, to invoke fear or to keep. Is there a balance there that you could perhaps speak to?
Yeah, I guess what's ironic, I guess, is I think of humility as what gives me my strength. It's so with humility, at least the way I think about it, when I walk into the room with my team, I am definitely not the smartest person in that room, but that's my job as a leader, is to hire people who are smarter than myself in each of the different domains that they're running. And so for me, the humility is realizing that element and then empowering my team through guidance to be even better as in their roles as they are. That doesn't mean when I, as you can probably tell, when I go into a meeting, I have a force. I mean, I don't see the humility element as being, weak or sitting back in a meeting and holding back. I see that authenticity being the power, if that makes sense. So it's an interesting concept to kind of think through. And I feel like the more that I focus on for myself, I'm always like, okay, let's check your thinking. Is this an assumption or is this actual fact? Is this, and the more I do that, I actually feel like the stronger I come across in a meeting as opposed to the other way around. And so, there's, they're not quite exactly opposites, if that makes sense. And in fact, I think the most powerful leaders that I've ever worked for and respected were probably the ones that had the most humility and were able to see, those individuals that they could collaborate with to get the work done and actually execute, if that makes sense.
Yeah, it does. And I think you're right. I think you're really coming back to authenticity. You
Yeah.
know who you are, and you've got incredible intuition about figuring out who you have around you, and that trust factor and being able to lock on that creates this Justice League in terms of a powerful table for running the company. That's
absolutely. And it's that trust, it's that being able to be candid and say your piece and not agree. And that's what's going to make our company win. I mean, I need everyone at my table to lean in and share their opinion and disagree. And then we debate in the meeting, make hard decisions, link arms, and walk out of the meeting aligned. That's really the goal. But if people don't feel comfortable leaning in and sharing, that's when companies get blinders. And I've seen it happen so many times. They get these blinders on, and then all of a sudden, a portion of the market goes a different direction, and somebody in the company knew that was going to happen. And there just wasn't that, either they didn't feel comfortable sharing or people weren't listening. And that's a big risk as a leader. So I try hard to continuously develop that humility, because, I think it can, if you create a culture where people aren't empowered, you're not maximizing your talent pool. I mean, you're just, you need your team to lead as well, if that makes sense.
Yeah, you're showing them the way, and empowering them is critical to it. So that's incredible. So if you're thinking about what you would share with someone who says, "Geez, when I grow up, I want to be Carrie," or in that someone like Carrie, or I want to run a company, I want to run a business. What are some of the things that perhaps we haven't covered? What are any advice that you would offer?
Yeah, I mean, I would say, and sometimes I sit there and think about kind of the dynamics of my career. It looks on paper a little bit kind of waterfally, or, and it's true. I've had just opportunities present themselves, and then I'm like, that's the next one. For some reason, I knew in my gut instinct it was the next opportunity to take. But actually, there was some strategy around it. So, as I looked at leaders that I thought were highly effective in all these different places I've had the privilege of working, they tended to have at least enough baseline knowledge to be able to identify the experts in each of those domains that are critical to a company. So running a company isn't just about technology or just about healthcare. It's finance, it's HR, it's, there are so many critical functions that make a company work. And you have to know enough about each of those domains to be able to identify the A player that you want to plug into that role. So I really tried to give myself expertise, not only on the commercial side, but the financial side and the technology side, so that, I could identify that A+ coder, or identify, somebody, a CFO that would be brilliant at helping think through, not only, just do the books, but helping you think through the financial strategy and planning of the company, which is critical in order to be able to make the investments you need to make in your commercial approach and R&D. So I would say, I think some people have been incredibly successful jumping in early and being a CEO right away. For me, I felt like I needed time and exposure to each of those domains to learn what it meant to be really good. And that's really helped me for taking on this position right now. So I look back, I don't regret it. I think doing all those different jobs was incredibly valuable. But, again, I think the most important thing you can do is actually just listen to your gut, and don't be afraid to lean into that next role. If something inside of you is telling you that you should do it. That would be my number one piece of advice.
That's great. No, that's great advice. That diversity of exposure to a business as early as you can get that helps in so many ways, because once you start seeing the different pieces of the organization and how they function, it can give you a much better vantage point when you are looking at a high level of how to move and bring out the excellence in each of them. So that's incredibly helpful. All right. So last thing, how do you manage your life? What's your trick? You have a busy life. You have a big role. You have a big family. You have is there anything that you find that's integral in your world that you feel really helps you center or excel, something in your routine or in your, wherever it may lie? I'd love to hear.
For sure. So I agree with all the people who say it's impossible to do it all. And in fact, I have now gotten to the point where in the morning I sit down at my desk and I tell myself that I'm going to be able to get about 10% of what I want to get done accomplished that day. So I try really hard to think about what matters. And I kind of ask myself that at the beginning of the day. And sometimes it's little stuff and administrative stuff, and sometimes it's big stuff. And one thing my dad told me, which and this kind of also goes along with sort of the self-discipline that you have to learn if you're going to be a swimmer, but do the hard stuff first. And so if there's something I've been putting off or a difficult conversation I haven't really wanted to have. I try to recognize that first thing in the morning and then get it done, so that it helps you feel a big sense of a relief and accomplishment. B, it's never as hard as I anticipate it's going to be. But more importantly, it's probably something that's extremely important to get done. So I try to lean into that as much as I can. It's not always easy, but I think those two things help. In terms of finding the right balance, for me, I'm not good at that. I try really hard, but I've had to trade off things, just to make sure, my kids and my family, my husband come first. And I really try to embed that in our company culture as well. And then, I try hard not to do emails on the weekend, really hard. That's very difficult. But there's always a trade-off. And, I have close friends of mine who are like stay-at-home moms that are brilliant mothers, and I feel bad for my kids because they don't have that. But at the same time, I know myself and I know I'm a better me and mom, therefore, doing what I'm doing. But I really think it's a personal journey and everyone's going to be different in it. But it's hard. I don't know. I'm still figuring that out. So I keep asking other people that same question.
Well, you've done a nice job thus far. And you're right. It's not, there's no miracle answer. There are tools though that you find you have to, and I love that, do the hard stuff first.
Yeah.
It's funny that the thing that is usually the hardest, the thing that you dread, think about the energy in dreading something alone,
Exactly.
And that's a big one for me too. I try to get those done as quickly as you can, but that's terrific. It sounds like you've got a tremendous support system at home, your family, your extended family. I know the industry embraces you. So this has been fantastic. I so appreciate you spending time with me and with our audience on what makes you so special. It's been great. And now you can go, hopefully, relax for 5 minutes before you get back into work. I know you've been gone all week.
I appreciate it, Holly. And thanks for having me on. And I'm hopeful that something might resonate with somebody who knows, but it's fun to kind of look back. It was fun to kind of think about this and look back and think about the inflation. I don't think many people have time. I know I certainly don't have time very often to sit back and be like, okay, what did make a difference? But I am so grateful to all the mentors I've had in my life, of which there have been many. And, and I consider mentors not only people I've worked for or who are above me, but I'm still being mentored by people who work for me now. So I think you can find them anywhere. And, leaning into that, I think, in your different domains is that's the best part of working,
that zest for learning is what's going to keep you doing this for many, many, many years and having many more successes and many more curveballs, of course, but that's part of the road. So
absolutely.
Well, thank you.
We're always looking for talented people. So I'm hopeful that, maybe some people will learn about Clarity and
oh yeah, they're a great story. I'm excited to work with Clarity. We are really enjoying it. It's a incredible opportunity in the marketplace. So we're glad to be in partnership with you. And once again, thank you for your time. And to our dear audience, thank you for listening to another episode of The Power Curve. We will see you soon.